He's editor-in-chief of Breitbart News and a New York Times best-selling author. And on this podcast, he brings deep research, prescient analysis, and world-class guests to a cutting-edge daily news broadcast focusing on America First politics, culture, and values. He's Alex Marlow, and this is the Alex Marlow Show.
All right, this Marlow Show is going to be absolutely wild today. I'm feeling not 100%. Those of you who've been with me for a while know that I'm prone to getting colds, and I will tell you, I have not missed a single show since we launched this podcast 6 months ago, and that is remarkable. I don't remember last time I couldn't miss a radio show because of colds. It's just because my voice gets weak, and I'm trying to protect it. And we've got some content in the can that I'm going to share with you. We did a brief interview with Josh Hawley yesterday. They did not have good connectivity. Misty is going to do everything she can to get that piece together in a nice way. I'm very optimistic. He's sensational. His answers are terrific. He speaks in very plain language, clearly very smart and capable. He will be the first repeat politician on the show also, so another historic Marlow Show first. So we have that for you. And then we have a longer speech that I gave. I gave a speech on Tuesday evening of this week, so a couple days before this podcast came out, on the state of the media for a group called EmpowerU, which is out of Ohio. They're a great group. I've spoken to them in the past. It is long. I will tell you about the first 25, 30 minutes is a speech where I give my state of play in the new media environment, talk all sorts of things like AI and the like, and where we have shown a lot of improvement over the years and where future battles come. And I think you're going to like that as well. And then I've decided that there was a Q&A at the end. I've decided I want to leave it, even though it'll look very long in your feed, the show today. But some of it's Q&A. I like the Q&A. I like the audience interaction, as you guys know, and we don't always have time to do it. So since we've already done it, I'm thinking, let's just use it. But first, I will note the breaking news. That is the one breaking news topic I have for today. I've got a bunch of news we'll get to tomorrow on tomorrow's show. But we got breaking news on the Pope from Chicago, the first American Pope ever, Robert Francis Prevost. My first take on this is how the media just completely airballed this. And no one had this guy on their bingo card. I think Polymarket's had him at about 1% to be the Pope. So it just reminds you at how much of the media is just hot taking. I know I said this in the last few weeks, is that everyone will act like they know what's going to happen. They can predict what's going to happen. And they couldn't. I did see one New York Times article suggesting he could maybe have an inside track to it, but it was, even that was kind of written as it's probably not going to happen, but maybe. So first American Pope, which is interesting. Here's what I know about him from what I've been able to research just in the time that we've had. So first American Pope is very significant. Why an American Pope? Well, there's two things. First of all, there is a big financial opportunity if he is able to re-engage Americans, because we're the richest country in the world, at least, overall, per capita, et cetera. We have lots of Catholics here, even though we don't have the most in numbers. We get the wealthiest, so that's certainly something. And the other thing is he's also very international. He spent a couple decades in Peru. He got very powerful in the Vatican itself. He was in charge of managing the bishops there, so very influential there. And so he's American, but he's also international. That does kind of work, and I think that does make a lot of sense just in terms of if you're piecing together the Mr. Potato Head of the Pope, that works. His supporters frame him as a middle of the road between the woke ball of energy that was Pope Francis and more traditional conservatism. I don't know if I buy that yet. That is how he's being sold to us, and it is from what I've been able to glean. He has not gone full woke. He has spoken out that he didn't think gender ideology should be taught in schools when he was in Peru. Seems like a basic one for the Pope, that you would think that's automatic. From what I've been able to, the tea leaves I've been able to read, and there are a few of them, it does seem like you're probably going to get a lot of the woke migration stuff. Just a guess, and we'll see. Hopefully I'm wrong, but it seems like the indicators are that he's going to be highly tolerant towards the illegal immigration, because when you're thinking from the perspective of the poor people and not from, building of nation states, then on an individual basis, there's always going to be those Catholics who are very sympathetic to illegal aliens who are just trying to make better lives for themselves, but From my vantage point, that's not good because that encourages the destructive legal immigration policies. So let's see if he does that. Recall that Pope Francis, Pope Francis was responsible for not only making this guy a cardinal, but he had picked, I think, over 80% of the cardinals who were making the selection. So this is not a surprise to me that one of Pope Francis's signature issues was basically being an open borders globalist. So I'm not stunned to see that the guys who he appointed as cardinals were the ones who were able to, who are likely to continue that legacy. And I admit, if that proves to be the case, it is a disappointment and it is a problem, and it'll influence, I think, the world in a negative way. So hopefully that's not what it is at first glance, but that is what it appears. He has called for he believes that church leaders need to be authentic and humble, and they need to be close to the people they serve, to walk with them and to suffer with them. Very much in the spirit of Jesus. I really like that. He doesn't think of himself as a king, and I think that he's seeing himself as a steward of the church in that way is a positive. Multilingual. I like multilingual. Speaks Spanish, speaks Italian. I think that's very good. He's seen as a more reserved guy than Francis. From a news perspective, this is worse. It's better for him to be more outgoing. But I will tell you that maybe this is an indication that he'll bring us back to some more tradition. I don't know how much to read in that yet, but Pope Francis was very outgoing. So he has a reputation of being not an excessive guy to being more reserved than Pope Francis. Pope Francis was really outgoing for a pope. I was a big supporter of Pope Benedict, who was reserved, and everyone loves Pope John Paul II, who is more outgoing. So there's a lot of good ways to do it, but whatever Pope Francis did was not great to me, even though he was very outgoing. I think what he stood for was not ideal because of the general wokeness, especially with regards to the borders. So I don't know. From a news perspective, more outgoing is better typically, but as a Catholic, I'm thinking about what's best for the church. So we will give that an incomplete grade as of now. He's 69 years old. That's pretty young, so it could be a long papacy if he lives into his mid 80s, not late 80s. Like, who knows? Could be a 20-year papacy, but you never know. Could step down at some point. And he has been scandalized a little bit because he's been accused of being soft on sexual abuse in Peru and Chicago, both places. The examples that are cited there's not many of them, but obviously that's not a good thing, because it is one of the things I think that prevents the church from being able to recruit new people, particularly young families, is that that they did not necessarily though they absolutely did not do enough to curtail some of the pre-sexual abuse and to discipline those responsible. It was a very slow, long process, not a transparent process. I don't dig that if it's true, but again, there's not a lot of data, but there's a couple of examples where he was accused of things, and obviously if it was so bad, he wouldn't have gotten to this level, but that's something to watch as well. So there's a lot to be, I think, there's a lot of reason to be skeptical. I think the American Catholics tend to lean liberal. But then again, it's Pope Francis guys who are picking. So how high should our hopes have been that we were going to get some sort of rock rib conservative? Mine weren't super high, despite a lot of cheerleading on X, the Everything app. So we will see, and pray for him, pray for the Catholic Church, and pray for the rest of the world. So hopefully he does a terrific job, and hopefully the fact that he is an American will maybe open up access to him communicating with the American press more, which how bad could that be? All right, so that's the opening. I'll have more Pope takes tomorrow, I'm sure, as I've had time to read up on this Pope, who really was a outsider from the media's perspective. I did not see any major media that predicted this was going to be the guy. So we're all playing catch up, and I'll have done more so by tomorrow. But again, we'll get into it with Senator Hawley next, and then my speech in the media to empower you, all for you. But first, I want to tell you that that pain and stiffness and decline in mobility aren't just part of getting older. And if you took the bone and joint health risk assessment that I've been talking about for the past few weeks, you would have realized it's time for action for many of you. And so this could be the solution you've been waiting for. It's the Juvent Micro Impact Platform. Uses patented technology to send gentle, targeted signals to your bones and joints. It's safe. It's non-invasive. It's actually kind of pleasant. I've used it quite a bit, and proven to support stronger bones, healthier joints, and better movement without drugs or surgery. Who doesn't like that? So don't settle for temporary fixes. You can try Juvent for 6 weeks, and if you don't feel the difference, you get your money back. Pretty good offer. So for a limited time, you can save $300. You got to use the code Marlow at checkout. Go to juvent.com/Marlow. That's JUVENT.com/Marlow. Marlow's got a W. Don't let YouTube fool you. Think there's no W. MARLOW. You deserve a future with less pain and more freedom. Make it happen today. That's juvent.com/Marlow. All right, here's Senator Hawley. Andrew Breitbart only called for one politician ever to resign, and that was a Republican, a guy named Spencer Baucus, after my friend and colleague Peter Schweitzer busted him for congressional insider trading, or that's essentially what it was. It was basically using his knowledge that he got from upcoming bills, legislation, handicapping that, and making trades accordingly to get very rich. Andrew thought that Democrats were doing it as well, but in particular Republicans. We got to be stewards of this stuff, and we really haven't been. That particular research by Peter led to the Stock Act, which came out, I don't know, a dozen or so years ago, which got sort of defanged along the way, even though it was sort of a good start. And one person who's been trying to upgrade it for a while is Senator Josh Hawley, and he joins me now. Senator, you've got the PELOSI Act, the Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments Act, spells Pelosi, in honor of the one and only Nancy Pelosi. First of all, it's very fun and hilarious. But before we get going into what this current bill looks like, of course, thanks for joining the show again. But this is not your first time doing this. And I reminded myself of this when I was preparing for the interview. You introduced this a couple of years ago as well.
Yeah, years ago. Thanks for having me, Alex. It's always great to be with you. I introduced it several years ago. And actually, last year, we passed it, believe it or not, through committee in the Senate. First time that a stock trading ban, because that's what we're talking about here. This bill is a ban on any stock trading or individual stock ownership by members of Congress. We actually got it passed on a bipartisan vote through committee. And, I think the reason for that is, Alex, what you've just been pointing to. It is so indefensible what these members of Congress do, where they use information that, frankly, only they are privy to make millions and millions of dollars on the stock market. People look at this, voters look at this, and they just want to vomit all over themselves. They want to vomit all over these representatives and vote them out. We need to stop it.
Yeah, and your social team does a nice job. You guys, when you announced this again, that you had a nice illustration of how Nancy Pelosi came in making, I think, less than $200,000 a year annual salary, leaving Congress with $240 million. I mean, how is that possible? Let's just be simple here. Let's just go. How do you do that?
You don't do it legally. And here's the thing: Nancy Pelosi and her husband last year in 2024 beat every hedge fund in the nation practically. So either Nancy Pelosi is a mathematical and financial analyst genius who ought to be hired by every company in America, by every rich person in America. Either that's the case, or maybe her information that she's privy to turns out to be pretty darn valuable. And everybody knows it's the second thing. It's just outrageous. And no member of Congress, I mean, you mentioned Republicans just a second ago. I don't care who it is, Democrat, Republican, whatever. It doesn't matter. None of them should be trading on stock using this kind of information.
So, Senator, have we considered that maybe Nancy Pelosi wasn't just a super effective politician, but maybe the best stock trader of all time? Have you considered that possibility? Do you think maybe that's the case?
Yeah, well, right. I mean, she and her husband last year beat, in 2024, they beat every single hedge fund in the nation, just about. I mean, you think about that. So, yeah, either she is a total financial genius, the likes of which comes along once every, 1,000 years, or maybe this information that she's privy to turns out to be pretty valuable. And we all know it's the second thing, and that's why we need to stop members of Congress from doing it, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. I don't care. The point is, if you are a member of Congress, you shouldn't be up here day trading. You should be focused on your job.
Let me ask you a question the founders asked themselves. Do you go to Congress to get rich?
Yeah, and the answer is no, you don't. And you shouldn't be here forever either. And those things are connected. And I think it's no coincidence that as members of Congress are here literally their whole lives. I mean, I don't know, how long has Pelosi been in office? 30 years? Longer? 40? The longer they're here, the more ways they find to make money off of their jobs. And listen, members of Congress are paid a salary. I mean, that's fine, obviously, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions in the Pelosi's case, that they've made while she has been in office, leveraging the office. And that's the farthest thing from what the founders intended. And really, it's a disaster for our system if it's allowed to continue without any kind of check.
So lots of people can't trade stocks, people who are certain jobs on Wall Street, cover Wall Street, spouses. So this is not unprecedented that we're saying that maybe there's got to be some restrictions here. But walk me through the actual implementation. What's in the bill and how do you implement it?
The bill is really simple. It would just ban members of Congress from owning or trading individual stocks. My view is if members of Congress want to save for their retirement or for their kids' school, it's fine. They can put their money in broad-based mutual funds like most other Americans. Most other Americans who invest in the stock market or save money with the market, they put it in mutual funds, and I don't mean industry-specific funds, I mean broad-based mutual funds. So members of Congress can do that under this bill, but that's it. Other than that, they can't own the stock, they can't trade the stock, no blind trust provision because those are too easy to get around and to manipulate. And the way you implement it is that you give everybody a current members of Congress a particular time period, 6 months in the case of my bill, in which to divest and or move their investments around to broad-based mutual funds. And then after that, if they violate the provisions, if they trade individual stock, if they own individual stock, they have to disgorge all of the profits and pay a financial penalty on top. It's tough penalties. It's public disclosure, public requirements for reporting so the public can see exactly who's doing what. That's the only way we're going to get this stopped.
So, Senator, I imagine this is something that everyone in the Congress and the Senate should support. So I assume that's what's going on. You're not getting any opposition to this.
No opposition. Everybody's totally for it, Alex. No, actually, of course, members of Congress hate stock trading bans because members of Congress love to trade stock. I mean, that's just the simple fact of the matter. Last year, I was able to get this passed through committee, but to get that committee vote, I had to work for almost 2 solid years just to get the committee vote. And even then, Alex, members of Congress, including my own party, tried to kill it at the last minute. So this is a heavy lift because it is such a sweet little goodie that members of Congress love, which is why sunshine here is the best medicine. We've got to put people on the record. We've got to force a vote on this thing. People need to know. The public needs to know who's for it, who's fighting it. And here's the other thing I find. Most members of the public, they think that already stock trading is banned. They can't believe, when they read stories about Pelosi and whomever else, they can't believe that this is currently legal.
What happens when a culture starts trading truth for comfort? Live Not by Lies is a bold new docuseries by Angel Studios. It uncovers how soft totalitarianism is quietly taking root in the West through censorship, digital surveillance, and the erosion of free thought. Inspired by Rod Dreher's best-selling book, the series features firsthand accounts from survivors of communism who recognize the warning signs because they lived through them themselves. The stories are raw, deeply moving, and they're drawing parallels between yesterday's totalitarian regimes and today's cultural climate. This isn't just about history. This is about right now and what we risk if we stay silent. Live Not by Lies is a challenge to every viewer to reject comfort at the expense of conscience and to stand firm in faith, family, and freedom. Streaming now on Angel Guild, join today by visiting angel.com/Marlow. That's angel.com/Marlow.
Hi, I'm Mike Mercer. I'd like to welcome you to the EmpowerU America podcast. Tonight's guest is going to be Alex Marlow, who you likely know as the editor-in-chief at Breitbart News. And this is actually Alex's second appearance at EmpowerU. So the topic tonight will be, the title is The Establishment Media Has Destroyed Itself. And we can't stop smiling, so it should be a fun show. Now I'd like to introduce Alex. So Alex has an interesting background. He actually met Andrew Breitbart when he was, I guess, a conservative at UC, a conservative student at UC Berkeley. So he was in college, and Andrew came to speak, and that's how Alex met Andrew. And he started working for Andrew while he was in college, and then he became Breitbart's first employee after he graduated. And upon Andrew's passing in 2012. Alex became the editor-in-chief at Breitbart. He's the author of 2 New York Times bestselling books, Breaking the News and Breaking Biden. And he currently is the host of 2 shows. One is the Alex Marlow Show, which is a daily podcast. and then Breitbart Confidential, which is a daily TV show, which I believe is exclusively for subscribers to the Breitbart Fight Club. So I'd like to welcome you, Alex Marlow.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back and EmpowerU. You guys are so cool to Breitbart, and that means a lot. The talk today is on one of my original areas of expertise, which is the establishment media. When I started, I guess I should welcome everyone by saying that sovereignty always beats journalism. I think that's the obvious joke of the week for those of us in the media business who are also in the America First business as well. And I started with Andrew Breitbart when I had already kind of started to understand in my life that the establishment media was not only wielding a immeasurable amount of power in our society, but was also blatantly dishonest. My first boss in the media business was Larry Elder. I'm sure he's familiar to most of you, commentator, talk show host, also expert researcher and debater. Should have been the governor of California, but we blew that one and we paid the price for it. But Larry was always constantly pointing out places where the media was getting things wrong. And this really made a big difference to me as a young person who was naturally a news junkie and someone who gravitated towards the news. Being able to curate and to understand what is the most important things that you can be reading and what is spin and separating spin from fact continues to be one of the modern challenges of our time. And there's no one better than Andrew, because Andrew and I share similar upbringing, but he has had years of experience on me for obvious reasons. Andrew grew up in LA and was a factory setting default liberal. So Andrew started out basically being steeped in the politics of Hollywood, the music industry, where he was a music journalist. He went to Tulane University. He would tell you that luckily he was drunk the whole time, so he didn't really learn anything there, and that probably saved him a little bit. And then he got into the media space, and what his entree into really conservative politics was watching the high-tech lynching of Clarence Thomas by Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy, where Andrew had tuned in after hearing media reports that this guy's a sexual predator and Ted Kennedy's got the goods and him and Joe Biden are going to take him to the cleaners, and then he's going to be humiliated, and this is going to be one of the biggest defeats in modern political history. And then what turned out is they had nothing. And it was two white guys standing up there smearing a black guy who had come from nothing, come from the impoverished South, and had ascended the American legal hierarchy and was going to be a historic, I think only the second black Supreme Court justice at the time. And they were just character assassinating him. And then it dawned on Andrew at that moment that, maybe I've been lied to about everything. Andrew's father-in-law was Orson Bean. This might be familiar to a lot of you in the audience. Orson was a raconteur. He was a comedian. He was an actor. The 100+ credits on IMDb. He hosted for Johnny Carson, I think, more than any other substitute host. And Orson actually happened to be a conservative guy. And Orson turned Andrew onto Rush Limbaugh. And he'd said to Andrew that Andrew should read some of Rush Limbaugh's books. And this, when Andrew tells me this story, it's very resonant with me because I grew up on a steady diet of talk radio. And Andrew had always just dismissed Rush Limbaugh as some sort of a loudmouth, a shock jock. And when you actually break down his ideas, they're actually quite good. And they were logic-based. They were reason-based. They were evidence-based. And that really stood out to Andrew. And it actually built up a rage within him because he realized that the establishment of our society was trying to withhold the truth from the public. And so thus he started to make his mark in the media, first working at the Drudge Report. Drudge Report was a conservative website. Andrew was there for years, many of the years unpaid, just simply curating the news for an audience that was mostly right-of-center people. He actually launched the Huffington Post. And Andrew's logic for that was that it would be he knew Arianna Huffington. He had researched for her in the past. And he said, you have all these crazy liberal friends. What you should do is you should actually get these people to blog for you. They'll do it for free because it'll satisfy their egos. And I'll benefit from it from being a conservative because this will be incredible content for talk radio. And so that was Andrew's logic behind the Huffington Post, is that it's your friends will like it for writing amongst themselves. And then we'll like it on the right, which will give you more traffic because we'll be making fun of you on talk radio. It'll be like pro wrestling. And so that was the concept for the Huffington Post, which is still in business. So Andrew's had his fingers on a lot of really important things. It was from there that he identified Greg Gutfeld, who was in the comments section of the Huffington Post, just making jokes in the comments, which Andrew thought was hilarious. And he was able to elevate him. And now Greg's been, I think, the Fox host with the most longevity, other than, I think, Sean Hannity at this time. So it's kind of wild that Andrew just had a great eye for that stuff. And I met Andrew when I was in college. I latched on to him very quickly. And I thought that his perspective, being someone who was not someone who had grown up on a diet of National Review, but instead had grown up on a diet of LA Times, I thought that was actually probably better, because I was from Hollywood myself. I was from LA, and I had seen that the real power in American cultural life was not necessarily with the political class. It was really with the cultural class. And Andrew had identified three key institutions: academia, the media, and the entertainment world, is really guiding politics. Those cultural institutions were upstream of politics. So it was those entities were setting the agenda, and the politics was actually reacting to it. And the key example of this was Jeffrey Katzenberg, who's a producer. Jeffrey Katzenberg was he basically handpicked Barack Obama to vault over Hillary Clinton to become president, because he thought he could package Obama as basically the lead in a movie. It's pretty remarkable stuff, but this is all how it went down. This is a genius movie producer, and I think David Geffen had a hand in this as well, music producer. They'd spotted Obama and thought, this is the guy, this is a once in a generation talent. And we don't care that he's a half-term senator. We don't care that we don't know exactly where he was born. We don't care that we don't know who his parents are. We don't care that he studied under literal Marxists at Harvard. We don't care that he was friends with literal terrorists in Chicago. We don't care. We're going to elevate this guy because we can package him and sell him like a movie star. And it worked. And it worked out well for a while for the Hollywood crowd. You had, while Obama was president, Jeffrey Katzenberg was essentially setting international policy for the entertainment world. Part of the reason that Hollywood sold its soul to China was because of a deal cut by Jeffrey Katzenberg along with Joe Biden. They were working with Xi Jinping at the time, who is the vice president of China at the time, or the vice premier there. And they had cut this deal so that America would get access to the Chinese market. And all of this can be traced back to that moment in time where it became official that the culture was more important than politics. Andrew spotted this a mile away before it ever happened. And then lo and behold, 8 years later, we got a literal reality TV star as the Republican nominee and would become the president and basically dominate both American cultural and political life for the last going on 10 years here. So that is a story and of really the origins of Breitbart. And we were able to use our vantage point from the coast, from LA, from inside the cultural machine. Those are the people that we would interact with in our day-to-day life, and giving us insight into how the left kept beating us at this game. And since then, we've been fighting back. And I think we've made a lot of progress in all three of those cultural institutions that we've seen. And for me, for the most part, I'll focus most of my talk today on the media world, the journalism. But also when it comes to Hollywood, we've seen a real neutralization of the power of the celebrity class, not in terms of brand, in terms of selling you product, but in terms of movies and TV guiding political life is really diminished quite a bit. And in fact, you see things like when movies get too woke, people boycott them and they end up becoming let's take the Snow White example recently, where they took Snow White, and Snow White was a white woman initially, and she fell in love with a prince, a traditional story, and that was the story. And then so Disney redid it with a woman who certainly isn't white, looks like an extraterrestrial, and puts her in to become a girl boss of the 100 Acre Wood or whatever it is. I don't know what you call it. I know it's Winnie the Pooh, but you guys see what I'm saying here. And it bombs. It loses a couple $100 million. And I think Snow White may have actually made more money for us on the right making fun of it on conservative content than it would have made money for Disney. And that is amazing, considering where we were, where Hollywood could just snap their fingers and command change on a political level. Now, all they're doing is essentially creating content for us to mock. And that's great news. And so you see that we have demands on our entertainment now that it cannot get the subversive woke stuff in it. You can't have subversive plot lines that undermine the nuclear family without people on the right pouncing on it, creating our own content off of it, and creating our own business off of it, and then making fun of them and causing them to lose money. And it's causing a real crisis in Hollywood. You're starting to see not only a neutralization, a avoidance of politics, you're actually starting to see rumblings, at least where I am in my neck of the woods, where you're starting to see people talk about whether or not we actually need to recruit conservatives to consult with us on our content to make sure we're not alienating too many of them. Because yes, they're committed partisans, but they don't really want to be losing too much money because they can't sustain themselves. They can't sustain themselves in that way. And one thing that wokeness is wokeness is the antithesis of good art. Good art must be fearless. It cannot be attempting to carry favor with a certain political worldview. I'm going to cough for a second. Hold on. So I talk a lot for a living. So you get dried out every once in a while. This is a big movement in Hollywood. I won't dwell on it too much. Academia, I'll probably come back to this. We've made a lot of progress in this regard, and it's related to what I'm going to talk about with the media. But we made a lot of progress in that a modern degree has never meant less. Getting a bachelor's in something, particularly the liberal arts, has never meant less in our society. I know this as someone who hires people, and we have people on staff with multiple degrees from Harvard. And it's one of these things where it's not really a plus sign for you, because people understand that if you've been to one of those institutions, that you could come out indoctrinated and entitled. And those are very bad things to get your start in a highly competitive American work environment. And the one thing that worked out for me, even though I did go to a great institution, I kind of run a little on the humble side, and I was willing to pick up laundry and to stock sodas and to do grunt work and to work long hours where I was sometimes just sitting around not doing what I felt like I was meant to be doing, with the faith that I was picking up skills that I would eventually be able to turn into the job or the jobs I wanted. And that is exactly how things worked out for me. It was I became managing editor of Breitbart News when I was 25, so the second most powerful person, I guess third most behind Andrew, who's publisher, in the newsroom editorially, and I became editor-in-chief when I was 27. But I'll tell you, the road from 21 to 25, it felt long at the time. In retrospect, of course, it was very short, but it felt there were a lot of long days of me doing things that felt like were unimportant. But I was a sponge, and I was learning all these things that Andrew had learned from his perch at the highest echelons of American journalism. And that is just something that is terrific. And my education, even though I can't say I didn't learn some stuff from Berkeley, I did, particularly about the culture of the left. But my education in journalism really took place when I was at the socks-clad feet of Andrew Breitbart while he was editing websites and writing brilliant headlines and interacting with some of the most powerful people on the planet, and just me absorbing that gradually. It's not something you can teach in a classroom. It's something that you have to seek out mentorship. I think this is becoming common knowledge. But that said, there is, in my neighborhood, I know there's an obsession with getting into elite colleges, and there's this huge class of consultants that help parents get their kids into colleges. And there is still, in certain circles, a lot of pressure to get those degrees. But it's never really meant less. And I think that is a very good sign. And I will just tell you, as someone who hires a lot of young people, I'm much more interested in character, work ethic, commitment level, and willingness to learn and extend yourself than I am whether or not you've got a great college in your resume. It really is a second tier thing. That's a big deal. And that's a nice, welcome change. But the focus today is something that is on the establishment media, where I feel like we have almost entirely neutralized the establishment. We've almost neutralized the news media, and this is very, very welcome. And I have some caveats to this, and I will get to those at the end, but I will just start with the good news, which is the obvious news, which is that the establishment media has never been weaker. And I'll cite Breitbart's influence as an example. We're every bit an anti-establishment outlet in that we are mostly work remote. We work all over the country and all over the world. We are not a large newsroom. I can guarantee you the Associated Press has more offices than we have individuals. And yet we've been at the forefront of the Brexit movement. We've been at the forefront of the rise of Trump. We've been at the forefront of Trump winning a second time. And we, I believe right now, without a doubt, are the paper of record for the modern Trump administration. I think we do the most neutral coverage, not just spin coverage, but neutral coverage of the news, and the traffic backs it up. I'm looking at our numbers. This is from the web publishers data collected by Newswhip, which is a neutral outlet. Breitbart is their number 4 most trafficked web publisher in the world, so just ahead of BBC News and New York Times. So we're behind Fox, CNN, and CBS News, all of which are multi-billion-dollar corporations. We're number 4 ahead of the BBC, New York Times, Daily Mail, NPR, which gets government funding. And those are big deals. The next thing on Facebook, we're number 4 on all of Facebook. We're number 6 on all of Twitter. And I feel like on Twitter, that's kind of our worst platform. I guess we call it X now, the everything app. And that includes like sports publishers and stuff like that. And I feel like that's our weakest platform, and we're still number 6 on it. That would be impossible. That would have been unthinkable when Andrew was launching this website from his basement, 15 odd years ago. So that's a sign that people are getting it. Other signs that people are getting it are just the polling data that suggests that the establishment media fading away very, very quickly in terms of credibility, that most people think they're being lied to when they learn information from the media. 71% believe the media rigged polls to fit their political agenda. This is a report that Breitbart broke exclusively because from Rasmussen, which is one of the best pollsters in the world, working with us exclusively to get the news out because they thought that we were a great place to break the news. So all of that works synergistically. But 71% of people get it. They understand the media is spinning. They're biased. They're not just pushing a left-wing agenda, by the way. They're pitching a pro-corporate agenda. Because recall that ABC News is part of ABC Disney. NBC News is NBC Comcast Universal. The New York Times has board members from Fortune 100 corporations on their board at the New York Times. These are people who are trying to protect the status quo. It's not all about politics. They want to be left alone, and they want to be able to just have their businesses, and they're not going to take on the challenging stories and push the challenging narratives that challenge their tribes and their audiences that give them money. It's a tough business, and they're not going to try to alienate people who are already reading them by bringing up facts and make them uncomfortable. So they're doomed because they can't really pivot, and that is where things have gone right now. And you're seeing this a little bit with what's gone on with 60 Minutes, for example. So 60 Minutes, the Sherry Redstone, who's one of the bosses at Paramount, which I guess is a big stake in CBS and 60 Minutes, she's been pressuring them to just lay off a little bit on all the Trump hatred, all the fake news about Trump. And we've documented so much over time at 60 Minutes. They've misled viewers on USAID staff reductions. They have grilled the YouTube CEO on why they don't censor more. They did that puff piece on George Clooney, treating him like he's just some sort of a big, important person, even though, first of all, he is not a great movie star. His movies never did that great. He's doing a Broadway show now, which I don't know why that entitles him to a 60-minute puff piece. His tequila is terrible that he made a bunch of money off of. Seriously, it's really gross, and it's got probably a bunch of additives in it. We won't know. He won't tell us what's in it. It's just a marketing thing. And he's marketed himself as this, handsome guy or whatever, but he's not that great. And CBS, bigging him up all the time. But the one that I really want to highlight lately was this interview they did with Kamala Harris, where they edited her to make her look more smart. So they thought she was looking dumb. So they edited her and so that she sounded not as dumb. They hid that they edited her. It eventually came out. Trump complained to the Federal Communications Committee, and because this is something that is clearly a violation of any sort of basic election law, that you've got a multinational conglomerate spinning the news openly in order to protect one candidate, the status quo candidate, of course. And they won awards for it. They won awards and nominations for that segment. So there's executive of 60 Minutes this guy named Bill Owens just left, he just quit because he doesn't like the pressure that's being put on the network. Well, but so what did they do the next day? So 60 Minutes came out after he quit, defended him, and then they went on about their business trying to frame Trump as a threat to democracy because he's putting pressure on lawyers, the lawfare lawyers who are single-handedly blocking Trump's agenda. what did 60 Minutes do under whatever is their new leadership? They put front and center Mark Elias. Mark Elias is the super lawyer who is the master of the political dark arts. And he is one of the core guys in the Russian collusion hoax. He's a professional fake news peddler, and he is maybe the ultimate lawfare peddler in all the United States. He is the biggest election denier in this country because he is the guy who led the charge that the Russian government colluded with Trump to rig the 2016 election, which was totally false. He was the guy at Perkins Coie who orchestrated the creation of the bogus PP dossier. And the list of the aggressive things he's done over his lifetime is nearly endless. And he really came back onto our radar in 2020 when he had used the coronavirus pandemic to greatly expand mail voting, which is how MAIL, which is how Joe Biden allegedly got to, 80 odd million votes, which no one really believes happened. No one really believes Biden really got that many votes. It was all because of guys like Mark Elias who were able to co-opt the circumstances of the time to make it so that it was easier to register people to vote and to turn in ballots. So that's what he does. He meddles in redistricting. He meddles in elections. He goes around the world and he sues until he gets the election, until he gets the political result that he wants. CBS puts him out there as if he's the most neutral guy in the whole world, and we're supposed to sit there. If you don't know who he was, this is in the last week. If you didn't know who he was, if someone didn't explain it to you, if someone like a Breitbart wasn't out there to fill you in on what this guy's all about, if you only in 60 Minutes and had to take their word for it, you would have thought that this guy is a stone cold neutral attorney. You might recall 60 Minutes declared the lab leak theory debunked for the coronavirus. And of course, now the coronavirus origins are almost all presumably supposed to be tied to the lab. It's just the idea that pandemic that killed millions of people, cut out trillions of the global economy, that came from a pangolin. Remember that? They told us it was the pangolin that did it. That it was a strange rodent with scales on his back. That they were at a odd meat eating festival in Wuhan, and someone had made an undercooked pangolin and an undercooked bat, and apparently they'd been in the same soup, and because of that, we got the coronavirus and everyone died. That's what they told us. And those of us who thought it could perhaps be the bioweapons lab up on top of the hill, that maybe that was where the pandemic came from, we were called conspiracy theorists, and we were told that we were fake news. And 60 Minutes is part of that. So that is bad that they're still this way, but the good news is that everyone knows now. But it doesn't mean they're going to stop continuing to try to push fake lies, fake news into our world. It's still there. It's still present. We still need to be vigilant. Just a couple of recent examples that are worth noting. The most obvious one, Abrego Garcia. Have you noticed how they always pronounce it like he's Italian? I don't know why they do that, but they do that. It's not even a Latin pronunciation. They do Abrego like he's I don't know. You guys will hear it now that you've heard me say it. So Abrego they treated him like he was a saint. He's just a Maryland man. He was an El Salvadorian citizen who had been busted human smuggling. And we on the right, we didn't do as good enough of a job of this because this was clear from the front. Our reporting at Breitbart, Neil Monroe was a reporter there. He was on this right away. And he noted that Abrego had gotten detained by the Biden administration while speeding. He was driving from Texas to Maryland, got stopped in Tennessee. He had 8 people in his car, adults. All of them had no luggage, and all of them had listed Abrego's house as their home address. So if that's not human smuggling, I don't know what is. That is human trafficking. That's what he was engaged in. The Biden administration let him go. He also has been accused of beating his wife, including strangulation, suffocation. Not a good guy. And then you've got the Democrats going down. They're flying down to El Salvador. They're staying in ritzy hotels. They're having margaritas with him. And they're trying to treat him like he's some sort of a saint. The media kept trying to push this on us like this was legit. Like this is not the guy who needs any special protections whatsoever. And yet they kept saying that he's entitled to due process. That's a hoax. There's no due process. You cannot have due process for illegal aliens in this country. That's impossible. So here's another fake news media narrative which connects here. So I was just doing some research. So Pew Research said that the peak illegal immigration in this country was actually in the year 2007. So in 2007, we had the most illegal aliens at 12 million. And so right now we might have between 11 and 15 million. Do any of you believe those numbers? Maybe in the audience, I can't see you, but I would imagine all of you are shaking your head. Their implication from the establishment media is, despite the open borders and all the surge under Obama and all the drama about stopping Trump's wall and all of the kids in cages narratives and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez going down the border and crying, after all that we have the same levels of illegal immigration. So it's because we can't count, and the media is uninterested, and they want to continue to tout fake statistics like we only have 11 million illegal aliens in the country. I bet the number is 30. I'll tell you, I know it's at least 15. It's got to be 20. I bet it could be 30. And if you want to give 15, 20 million people due process in our immigration courts are already backlogged 3 million people. We're behind years on our immigration courts anyway. So this would cause a massive expansion of the courts. The backlog will go on forever. We could not do due process for these illegal aliens, even if we wanted to. That's the point. Even if we had our bleeding heart takes over, we decide they all must get due process. That's an impossibility. We do not have the court system to do that. We are not structured to do that. And yet you will see today, if you watch the news, discussion of whether or not illegal aliens deserve due process. All of that is what the media does. And luckily, there is this robust conservative media ecosystem to push back on it, to arm people like you guys with talking points. You could take it back to your community and you could talk about these things. But we've made a lot of progress, but it doesn't mean the media is going to stop. They're going to keep lying. They're going to keep doing things like what CNN did this week, where they platformed a Sinaloa gangster, a gang member, who criticized America for the fentanyl crisis, saying that it's basically our fault because there's a market in America for fentanyl, and that's why we have a fentanyl problem, is because Americans just like drugs. So, and CNN just puts this person out there, and they let them cover their face, they let them mask their voice, just so they can take shots at Trump. So it's still bad. The media is still bad. It's still a chaotic environment. But the good news is they're incredibly weak. We mock them constantly, and we're beating them, given that data, in a lot of areas as well. But there are some things that I do want to caution the audience about, and where we need to be vigilant, where we need to be diligent. First one is that the left, if they lose this flank in our battle for the soul of the republic, they're just going to create new flanks. The latest one is lawfare. They tried corporations, the wokeification of corporate boards, and also the academia is still very left-leaning because it just tends to attract people who want to indoctrinate other people to those fields. And academia is incredibly pernicious because the universities are also ruining our cities. They're not just ruining the minds of our young people, that they come in, they create this economic environment that takes over our cities. The people who work at these schools vote for the George Gascon-style DAs who don't enforce laws. And it really is a contagion, and there's a lot of rot around a lot of the left-wing institutions in our country. And this stuff is not going to get fixed right away, but we need to continue to cut off any federal funding that we can from these woke institutions, be it media outlets like NPR and PBS, which Trump is doing, be it some of these woke schools, woke journalism schools. We cannot be subsidizing them with federal money. That's very important to do. They're weak, but have we supplied the replacements necessary? And we have not yet. Luckily,
what do you, Alex? What do you mean by that? Supplied the replacements necessary?
So we need to come in and swoop in where the media has created a void, and we need to establish our own alternatives. For every one Hillsdale college, there is, a dozen left-wing alternatives to that. That number is just too high. Even if those left-wing alternatives are getting weaker, they still vastly outnumber us. For every Breitbart, there's a half a dozen outlets that are nearly as powerful on the left. And that's not great. And so we have a dominant voice in our culture at the moment online in a couple of ways that are really encouraging. First of all, the meme culture. Conservatives now are much funnier online. And this is a big deal because a lot of people get their news packaged with entertainment. Conservatives are much better at this stuff. That's why the podcast culture skews conservative. The influencer culture is skewing conservative on platforms like X, even Instagram, because the left is not fun anymore. The wokeness is anti-fun. Wokeness is anti-free speech. It's anti-joking around. It is way too literal and way too serious, and they do not have a good time. This is Andrew Breitbart's vision that we would get to this point. That's a very big positive that we have that. But that said, we need to continue to foster companies, outlets, individuals who are trying to seek out the truth and are not just trying to chase clout and are not just trying to get attention for themselves online, but are trying to do the very hard work of journalism itself, which is trying to find the truth without trying to curry favor with the powers that be and tell actually what's going on. Some of this takes research, some of it's expensive, some of it's time consuming, and we have not established, I don't think, nearly enough alternatives for people who are trying to disentangle themselves, to decouple from the establishment media. So that is still in front of us. It's very hard to do because of the nature of the business. It's a tough business to be in the media. Breitbart, we do well because we're dominant, but it really takes the level of success that we've achieved to be able to be self-sustaining. There's some great journalists who work independently, who work on Substack, or maybe have built a huge following, a personal following. But we need to come up with creative ways to be able to fund those people to get their feet wet and to learn the craft and the trade, and to build up that rhinoceros skin. Then you need to be able to take swings at the most powerful people in the world. But there is a huge opportunity on the horizon, and I'll close with this a little bit, and then I can't wait to take questions. But the era of AI is going to be fantastic because the AI, we've got a huge problem with it in the sense that if woke information is going into it, you're going to get woke information out of it. But for a citizen journalist, you're going to have so much knowledge, the tip of your fingers, it's going to dwarf the power of what Google has. And if you're able to use AI effectively, you're going to be able to essentially get knowledge overnight that you would have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get from a university. And during that time, you would get indoctrinated with all sorts of nonsense. We're going to be able to go around that. People are going to be able to learn things very quickly. We're going to be able to fact check very quickly. The establishment media's narratives are going to get quashed very quickly. They're not going to be like the Russian collusion notes. How about the Charlottesville hoax, where Trump said that, where they said that Trump said they were fine people on both sides, meaning they were fine Nazis. Trump, of course, never said that. And he said immediately after, I condemn the Nazis totally. That narrative went on for years. In the era of AI, that's not going to happen. That's going to get crushed right away. People are going to understand it right away, and it's going to get pushed out into the public and into the cultural consciousness immediately. So I think we've got a chance here. I think we're at the precipice. If we think we're winning now, if we play our cards right, if we play smart, if we're not foolish, if we don't indulge in fake news ourselves, if we try to elevate the sharpest, most powerful, most savvy people among us, and not just go for the low-hanging fruit, and to try to elevate the most thoughtful, the most thorough, the most careful to be the leaders of our movement, the Trumps of the world, the J.D. Vances, the Rubios, the guys who are doing now, the people who are name any of your top cultural commentators right now are generally very smart and responsible. If we continue to move in this direction, we're going to have an opportunity to completely crush the establishment left, and we are just getting started if we stay in the track that we're on, because their most powerful tools are being dismantled systematically day in and day out online. And so we at Breitbart, we feel like with our community at Breitbart News, with our ability to curate the news, which we've been honing since Andrew, and with the strength of our brand, which is seen as fast, fun, and credible, we feel like we're in the absolute best position in all of media, and it's a pleasure to share some of my insight as editor-in-chief with all of you in the audience. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Great. So people can enter questions in the chat, and I have a number of questions that I'll start asking, and as soon as we get some questions from the audience, I'll share them. But I was wondering, you mentioned developing our own tools. What are your thoughts on the well-known journalists that are starting to develop their own networks, like Tucker Carlson's network or Megyn Kelly's network, or like I watch Bannon on America's Voice, right? So America's Voice News. What are your thoughts about do you think those will be effective tools to develop this conservative media ecosystem you're talking about?
Yeah, I'll try to stay. I'll try to keep it. I think I'll say something nice about all those examples. What Tucker is doing with his long form conversations is really fascinating. He's modeling himself after Rogan. You can see that because Rogan does the same format where he has one guest and he talks to them for 3 hours. And Tucker's doing the same thing, usually about 2 hours. Tucker stuff is more political, but this is first of all, it's theater of the mind. It's very compelling. And second of all, lefties can't do this. Their ideas are too thin. So if this is how this is a popular way to consume media, and it is, consume the news, then inevitably this is going to favor people with a center-right worldview. And I don't agree with Tucker on everything. It's not like he's my spirit animal of the news, but he has an ability to debate his case, to make his case, to be entertaining, and to sustain a conversation for a long period of time, which is a sign of deep intellect. I love that very much. And I think that it's a great model, and it's one that the left can't emulate. They would try it if they could. They can't do it. Megan's used her public persona, her notoriety, her fame, her fortune to be able to, I think, provide a business model that how to launch a huge podcast. And then what she's doing with that power is she's anointing a handful of new voices that she likes and bringing them onto her network, and she's elevating them. I was thinking about this with Mark Halperin, who's joined her network, not a right-wing guy, but a very smart journalist. And he just launched a podcast with her. He had his own podcast and it was good, but it was, a top 300 podcast. And then he joins up with Megyn Kelly. She puts her weight behind him. And then all of a sudden it's a top 20 podcast. It's the same thing. It's just, she's anointing him, and that's a power that she's earned. And I think that works out well. Real America's Voice. I like Real America's Voice. They're doing a good job turning talk radio into TV, which not people have tried this forever, but it's been hard to turn talk radio into TV. Real America's Voice is doing that. They also cut clips very quickly online. I was on Charlie Kirk's show today, which is on Real America's Voice. And they hear the conversation, a half an hour conversation. They found a pretty good clip from the 30 minutes I was on. They isolate it and they turn around, they put it out very quickly, and it's doing very well online. It's getting a lot of attention. That's also appealing for me as a guest because I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to ask for anything. I didn't have to think about anything. It's very new media savvy. It's smart business because that makes me feel good about coming back on the shows and doing the shows. And it shows that they're being thoughtful and fast paced and excited about the news. And I like that a lot. So I don't see the left building a lot of our alternatives. They've got a couple, but you got to be able to be fun and fast and sharp. And some of those people on the left will emerge, but Joy Reid is not gonna be able to do stuff like that. I mean, she can't do a 3-hour thing and be interesting and entertaining. No, you could package someone like that in a controlled environment, controlled by the bosses at MSNBC, and maybe they can make it work, but it's just not going to work on the online digital space. So we're very well positioned here, and it's why we're picking up so much of the youth vote right now.
Well, we have a question from an audience member. Barb asks, do you see anyone on the left that is rising as a superstar who can engage and unduly influence the public at large?
No, it's pretty glorious to say that. But one of the characters on my podcast is Jasmine Crockett, as is the case with so many of your favorite shows, I'm sure right now, who was really sort of a normal young woman, and then she got to the Congress and then acts what I refer to as ratchet. She just leans into the inarticulateness and the ghetto attitude, and that's not her. Naturally, she just does this on purpose for affectation. And I thought she was a joke, kind of, and Kamala Harris shouted her out as being one of the leaders of the movement. So if that's who they're elevating, I think they're completely lost. Trump continues to trap Democrats into defending indefensible positions. Getting $9 billion for Harvard, which is a $50 billion endowment. It doesn't need $9 billion from taxpayers. All the Democrats defend that. I went to the Abrego Garcia example where this guy's a alleged wife strangler and a clear human trafficker, and all the Democrats are defending him. So Trump does this, and he tricks the Democrats into making really bad decisions all the time. So I don't know. It feels like they've got a couple of networks that are popping up. They're doing okay. There's one called the Midas Touch Network, which seems to be building a really big podcast. subscriber base, but it's very hard left, and I don't know if that's just satisfying an audience that's already there. I don't know if that's growing an audience. So we'll see what happens, but I don't feel like they've got a lot of cultural figures who are pulling in new people. And that's great for us. It's a huge opportunity.
Something I noticed after Trump won this past election, what we started to hear a lot on the left, and Van Jones was the first person I heard say this. He started talking about how it was this big insight for him, right? Like they had podcasts. We have to do podcasts. And then so there's this idea, they think that the right won because they had podcasts, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing I keep hearing is we have to work on our messaging. And so my response to the first thing was, they don't seem to understand that the reason we had to develop podcasts is because we were being completely censored in the mainstream media. I mean, that's the whole idea behind Breitbart, right?
Exactly.
The mainstream media, it was out of desperation that the right created podcasts, and they don't seem to understand that. Like they had this big platform, and we were censored out of it. So it was out of desperation we started podcasts. It's not that the podcast itself is going to win voters.
Yeah, there's a chicken and egg thing here, which is interesting to track, because I was a very early adopter to podcasts. I podcasted in college, I've been in college for 17 years, and I always listened to podcasts from the very start. And I always thought that I'm one of the few people on earth who's not surprised that it's kind of taken over the world as a medium. Sadly, I have to say, I recommended to Andrew Breitbart while he was alive that we should launch a podcast network, and he didn't think it was a bad idea. I could just tell he wasn't going to do it. I wish we did. We probably have a lot more money these days, but it is something that we needed, because we're not going to get anointed by an NBC Universal or a Comcast or a Disney, and they're not going to invest in our personalities and give us a budget. So we got to do stuff ourselves. And so what are our advantages? That we can go deeper on more topics because we just have more to say on more topics. And we've developed, I think, more of an entertaining a sensibility on the right, more of a counterculture sensibility. A lot of people on the right are pretty fluent on a lot of other issues like self-help, personal help, health, nutrition, just traditional lifestyle, God and the Bible. People in conservative movement can generally hang on a lot of different topics. And the left, I feel like, does retreat into comfort zones of wokeness and shutting people down. And this has been a real trap they set for themselves, because they've been trying to shut down speech for time immemorial. I mean, just one of those things where they've always wanted to have less conversation. They've wanted to not reach across the aisle and talk. And that really weakens your ability to compete in this hyper-competitive environment where people are just having long-form conversations, and that's how they're relating to an audience. People are developing audiences with authenticity without being too controlled, and that's really anathema to whatever is the vibe coming out of CNN or the New York Times. I mean, those are highly controlled environments where there's only certain things you can say. There's so many third rails. And I think Americans are just sick of it. And that's really embodied by Trump. And that's why we're doing well in that new media space.
Well, I feel that's related to my second point there, that the left doesn't seem to get that it's not about messaging, it's about values and policies.
Yeah.
So they seem lost, like, well, we got to change our messaging. Well, no, you got to change your values. That's the problem. If they can superficially change their messaging, but no one's going to believe it, right? They have to show genuine, authentic change.
Well, what's so interesting is to think about how the left all agrees right now that they need to do something different, that they can't behave the way they behaved over the last few years and win elections. But they don't know what to do. There's this conversation of, do we need to go dark woke? Do we need to just be more woke than we were before and just be meaner about it? Do we need to moderate? Well, the base doesn't want them to moderate. The base is into all the left-wing stuff. The base wants 3 men to win every women's track and field race. Like, that's what they want. Like, that's what the base likes. So it is. So what are they going to do? They know they need something different. But take Doge, for example. The left, if they were smart, they would have said, this is actually a great idea. We should have done it, and we're going to help out. And maybe they find small ways to make the case that they could do better than we do. But instead, they act like it's an outrage that the USAID was funding transgender Sesame Street in Afghanistan. It's like that's not going to fix their problem if they're all of a sudden for taxpayer funded transgender Sesame Street in Afghanistan. So they're so beyond lost because they can't decide. They know they can't. I think a lot of them would like to go even harder left. But they know data statistically that's not going to work right now. And so what does a moderate Democrat look like in this point in time? No one knows. I certainly have no idea, and I think about it every day.
Here we got another audience question. Paul asks, it seems to me that the Congress still relies heavily on the legacy media for their source of news and standing. Are you seeing many of them switching to alternative sites such as Breitbart?
Yeah, so we do incredibly well in that space, but there's not enough. And even in we're talking about the podcast space, there's very few conservative shows that are really political. Charlie Kirk does a political podcast. Ruthless is a good political podcast, but there's just not that many that are Washington centric. Here's literally what's going on, what bill is working through the Congress type podcast. And we do need that, I think, because there's a big opportunity. We don't have any great newsletters that track that stuff. We will do one at Breitbart eventually, but we haven't yet. And, there's just ways to that the left continues to dominate. And that's not good because the Republicans need to know what's going on in the world. They need to know who's showing up where and which world leaders are here and what's being debated and what's in what committee. And it's hard to keep up with that stuff. And we could do a better job of doing that. And I think we will over time, but we're not there yet.
I want to get your reaction to this. I listen to NPR every day, and I have for decades. And I email the journalists there frequently, and I had a dialogue with a journalist at NPR about the censorship of conservatives, and they seem to be totally clueless. So I explained, like, I'm a nobody, right? During the 2020 election in October, I had 2 Twitter accounts shut down completely without explanation. I shared information about COVID on LinkedIn. I had my LinkedIn account shut down. And then I've had variously 2 or 3 YouTube channels that have been shadow banned, right? And one of them was shadow banned simply because I just made a comparison between Obama and Trump. And I said, Obama promised to renegotiate NAFTA and he didn't. So Trump fulfilled Obama's promise.
Yeah.
Right? So I explained to this NPR journalist, that how this is, I'm nobody and this is what happened to me. And their response was, that's fascinating. It's like they don't really understand what was going on. Like, this is serious violation of free speech. I was completely shut down, and I'm not anybody. I'm not like a well-known person, That's how bad it was. But they seem totally clueless about, the constitutional, the violation of free speech rights that's going on. I'm wondering if you had a
Yeah, no, this is you're speaking exactly my language, because one thing that really stood out to me while I was a Berkeley student is that Berkeley is huge. Its identity is about the free speech movement. And I used to study at Free Speech Cafe, where there's all these memorials and all these memorabilia connected to the free speech movement. These are the group of people that have always wanted to shut down conservative voices. They come up with really to do it surreptitiously. They'll do it with shadow banning. This is a thing that on Twitter that we noticed that Breitbart, some of our top personalities, is back in like 2016, 2015, that they were not getting the same reach and engagement as you would have expected given their follower count. And we were confused by this, and then we dug into it and we tracked certain things in certain ways and realized there was something called shadow banning, which was there were people, anonymous people, who were on Twitter at the time, this is long before Musk owned it, that were blocking us. And we were, of course, told we were liars. And then, of course, it turned out it was true, that it was investigated. And eventually it became, the Twitter files came out when Musk took over and they put out all that information. It confirmed everything we knew to be true. And we were told we were liars for reporting it. Same thing on YouTube. YouTube clearly is censoring conservatives and putting our content and making it so it's harder to get to. It's never on the front page. There's tons of information about this, and it adds up logically because YouTube's owned by Google. Google's a left-wing corporation. They have not worked well with Republicans ever. They probably never will. They're openly anti-Trump and have been. So these are very real things. And if you say certain things now in society, there is a chance that you will get whatever it is online. It will be removed. And we have to warn against this because it can get much, much worse than it is now. And that's why every election matters. We need to stay on a war footing. We cannot get fat and happy right now. We need to get fired up for the next election. We need to win bigger than we did the last time. Because if the left takes hold, they will try to engage in some sort of a Chinese social credit score system where if you are viewed as a persona non grata by the left-wing government, then you lose access to certain rights, like your right to have an online presence. And you will barely even know it's happening to you, as was the case with us at Twitter, where we were barely even aware that we were getting shadow banned until we really spent the time to figure it out. You won't even know. And that's why we need to make sure we win every election. Literally, that is what this all comes down to. If we win every election, these problems will go away. If we lose elections, that's where they want things to go.
You mentioned you're number 4 on Facebook. Is that in spite of shadow banning? Are you heavily shadow banned on Facebook?
Oh, we were. Zuckerberg has taken the reins off. So Zuckerberg's interesting because he really is. He helped Joe Biden win in 2020. So don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. He is willing to rig an election for Democrats if that serves his purposes. But he is a guy who I think is more capitalist than political. I don't get the impression he's political. So what happened was in 2016, Breitbart was the biggest publisher on Facebook. And then Trump won. And so that was immediately considered an outrage. There was congressional hearings about it. There were big studies done by Harvard and MIT to try to figure out how this could possibly be the case. That an outlet that was brand new and not as well known as the New York Times and places like that was winning in this new media war. And then their guy, Trump, won the presidency. So what Zuckerberg did was instead of just discriminating against us, which he did that too in a way. There was a blacklist of conservative outlets and people on Facebook or a gray list where if their reach was as much. I'm not saying there isn't an element of that going on. We've reported on this. You guys can spend time doing a dive on this at Breitbart. I've got a ton of information in Breaking the News, my first book on this stuff. But what was more interesting was the approach he took is he diminished all political content. So as opposed to just singling out us, to a degree, I think he did, but for the most part, he just made it so that Facebook is a place for grandma pictures and for recipes and for pets, and it's not really a place for politics. And those of you who just use it for politics, that's fine, but you're a niche group. So since the 2024 election, we've certainly noticed that I think he's taken the reins off the algorithm to allow for more political content to go viral on the platform, which of course favors us because we're very good at it. So we're happy about this news. But so theoretically, it's not, he discriminates against political content. Since then, since Trump won, I think he's lightened up a little bit, and that's to our benefit.
Yeah. We have another audience question. Candy asks, do you think the Democrats get a lot of their money from things like USAID, and that's why they're so angry?
Yes and no. I don't want to be taken out of context here. I think USAID reveals the scope of the corruption and how much waste is taking place in Washington and how there's nothing they won't spend money on. But I don't think that's the vast majority of where we waste money. We waste money on things like the defense sector, forever wars, entitlements, interest on the debt. So there's a lot of not as sexy stuff to talk about when it comes to government waste. I think the USAID thing just kind of really shakes people up in the sense that when we're willing to waste $5 million on, the gender bender surgeries for rats, then like what aren't we willing to waste money on? I think that's sort of the implication with that. So I don't know how much more meat's on the bone at USAID, but it was certainly a revealing news cycle when that was front and center.
I wanted to ask you, Trump, the left certainly, when Biden got into office, right? When we saw when the the right saw what he was doing, like with the J6 prisoners, right? And the lawfare. People felt really threatened. So we felt that he was being very heavy-handed, right? Then Trump gets into office, and it's been like a whirlwind, right? And I'm sure that the left now perceives that Trump is being heavy-handed, right? And they probably don't understand that it's coming from our perception that Biden was heavy-handed, right? There was, stuff that probably wasn't legal going on, right? Unconstitutional activity among with Biden. So here's my question. Since they view Trump as being very heavy-handed now and being sort of going outside the Constitution on a number of things, do you suspect that we'll see a huge backlash once Democrats get back in office?
I don't know. It's a great question, and that's a risk. But what I've always thought is the Democrats are going to be as heavy-handed as possible anyway. So I feel like I've always wanted to use their playbook. This is something Andrew and I shared. It's part of why I constantly refer to my growing up in Hollywood and going to Berkeley, is because I saw their playbook. I saw how aggressive they are, and they don't care about our opinion. No one on the left cares about any of the opinions I'm sharing right now or what you guys share every week. They're not interested. They're just interested in implementing their own agenda. They don't really care about us or how we think, and they're not really that concerned. They're only concerned about what they can do, legal or illegal, literally, in order to get what they want to get done through. Now, I don't think we should do stuff illegal, because I do think the moral high ground matters to a degree, and Trump does too. Think about it. He's not defied a court order. No matter what they've said, all of these clearly political efforts to shut down his agenda, these mini presidents all around the country in these district courts who are blocking his executive actions, whether or not they're legit or not, he's letting it all play out. He's calling out a couple of them on Truth Social, but for the most part, he's trusting that the appeals process is going to get him more victories than losses. I think he is right about that. And he's going to focus on making sure that he's got the best judges possible that are going to go to the bench when he gets the chance to appoint them. And I feel like that there's a real discipline to that. So whether or not we talk about him in a heavy-handed way, I think he's much smarter and savvier than people give him credit for. He always has been. And I think that's incumbent upon us to look at the left's playbook and to evaluate, what are they doing that we should be doing? What are they doing that we probably shouldn't try? And choose accordingly. But they provide a lot of blueprint for tactics. Tactically, the left has always beat us. They've always had better tactics, which is why they've gotten such unappealing candidates and values through and turned into policy, is because they're tactically good at selling it and implementing it. And we can really benefit from learning from that.
Looks like we have two more questions from the audience, and then so Bruce asks, what does the left ultimately seek to accomplish? And his second question was Marxism.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Marxism. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think ultimately you take things to an extreme, and I think that they would like control over your lives. I think they like the elimination of the nuclear family. I think they would like so that the state runs everything. They like an all-powerful state, and eventually an all-powerful super state where there's a world government, where there's no sovereignty, there's no nations, there's no everything is some sort of an odd shared culture. So where they feel like they can control more people. I think ultimately they would like to impose their values on us. I think that's how they are. They're convinced that they are godlike figures. They don't get their values from God or family. They get them from just their political punch list that they've got. That's what motivates them every day. So they want to win political victories and turn those victories, I think, into power. And I think that's what it is. And the way to achieve that is through Marxism, communism, socialism, whichever word you want to use, statism, collectivism, all the isms, they're all variations of that. So I think that's where this is going. They tipped their hands a little bit with Biden when it might have been an accident, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez floating a Green New Deal that would have cost almost $200 trillion, I think, or at least 100 trillion, like $100 trillion. What is that? That's communism. That's what it is. And if you look at places like China, which they are constantly making excuses for China, that they love Chinese slave labor now, that we've learned that in the last few weeks. Another thing that Trump's tricked them into doing is they love Chinese slave labor. Anything Trump does to oppose Chinese slave labor, and the Democrats are for it, and are for the opposite now, which means they like the Chinese sweatshops. It's clear. Well, they don't criticize China because China's already got the communist system. And that's when you start realizing that, oh, wow, that's kind of a wild coincidence that they make tons of excuses for the communist nations and they sit around criticizing our country all the time. They don't like freedom. They like control, and they're authoritarians. That's the ultimate for me. But it is, I think you guys are on it. And that's one where I feel like I'm probably not sharing too much that you guys haven't thought of yourselves on that front.
Final question. I'm curious about NPR. I'm wondering two things. Number one, do you think that Trump's executive order will stand, that they'll be defunded? And number two, what would you think would happen if they're defunded? Since what do they get, like 10% of the money from the government? What do you think?
It's a great question. It's great. Yeah, it's because I would love to say that this is some sort of a massive victory and the world will change completely because NPR is not getting money. I don't think it makes much of a difference in the end, but I still love it. It's something we've talked about for decades. My entire adult life, we've talked about defunding NPR. There is no logic that only NPR and PBS should get your money. You and the audience, you guys fund it. There is no logic that those two outlets, of all the outlets on earth, the only ones get your money. It doesn't make any sense. So obviously that needed to end. And we talked about it. Every Republican has talked about it and no one's done it, including Trump the first time, to be fair. Trump did it. That's awesome. I love it. But that said, NPR will be fine with 10% less budget. They're, at least in the short term, their audience, which they take donations, will just up the donations and make up for some of it. So I don't know how much it changes the world overall, but the same thing with the USAID stuff. The principle matters to me. I really believe that we should operate principally first, and then you can let the chips fall where they may, and you can at least sleep well at night. You should not be able to sleep well at night if you're a conservative in power and you're comfortable with NPR getting federal tax dollars from your voters who support you. You should never been able to sleep well knowing that's the case. Even if it's not much in the scheme of things, you've got to operate on a principled plane. And we weren't doing that in that regard. And Trump is trying to. He really is. He's got a lot of, I think, principles he sees clearly. And so does it change the world? I don't know, but I still think it's a great win.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was fantastic. A lot of deep, nuanced insights for us. So we really appreciate it. Thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks for the great questions. And it's nice to have the forum. And I'll be sure to come back soon if I'm invited.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.